Okay, people are entering. Welcome, everyone. I can't see you or hear you, but I know you're here.
Whoops. This is what happens when I have the in front of me, Diana. Or a wild mouse.
Well, there's 10 people in the room now. We can't see or hear you, but we know you're there and welcome you to this session. Happy that you could make it. Join us today, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. People are continuing to arrive. Unfortunately, in this webinar format, Lori and I can't see or hear you, but I see that you are coming in. The participant count is rising. Lori, did you smile so Alex could take a screenshot? Okay, participants still entering. So it's straight up noon right now, and we want to be respectful of your time, but we also want to have everyone in the room. So maybe just take another minute or so, let folks continue to come in. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and get started because we don't want to miss any of the wonderful information that we're going to be hearing this afternoon. So welcome, everyone, to the first of 5 Lunch and Learn sessions that will explore how to build a high-performing development program. As you can see, my name is Diana Gordon, and I'm the president of ARCS Foundation Oregon, the sponsor of these sessions. Today's session is entitled Elements of a High-Performing Development Program, and I think you all received the notification upon entry that this and all of our sessions will be recorded to serve as a resource to share with others. I know we have a diverse audience joining us today. Some of you are members of ARCS Foundation Oregon, some are members of other ARCS chapters, and some are representing other nonprofit organizations. For those of you who are not familiar with ARCS Foundation, we are a women-founded, women-led organization that provides funding to academically outstanding PhD students in science, technology, engineering, and math. I'll pop our website into the URL and my personal email into the chat. I'll pop our website URL and my personal email into the chat if you'd like additional information. 2024 marks the 65th anniversary of ARCS Foundation and the 20th anniversary of the Oregon chapter. 2 years ago, ARCS Foundation Oregon hired an executive director to help us expand our capacity and to take us to the next level. Lori Slaughter brought over 25 years of experience in leadership and development to us. Her deep understanding of philanthropy and philanthropists was built over years of working with outstanding development leaders at UCLA, OHSU, and other foundations aligned with higher education, medical research, and healthcare. She has extensive experience in building organizational capacity, expanding development programs, and engaging philanthropists in meaningful projects that align with the issues they care most about. All this made her the ideal candidate for our position. And now, because our time is short and you are here to learn about development, I'll turn this over to our featured speaker, Lori Slaughter.
Thank you, Diana. I appreciate that kind introduction. It makes me feel a little old too, but that's okay. I've appreciated working with you and the board in these past couple of years as we go through a tremendous amount of change, which will take us to the next level and help us fund more scholars, which is what we all want. I also want to thank everyone who's on the call today. For those of you in the Northwest, you're probably a captive audience because you can't get out and drive around on the ice. So I appreciate you being here with us today. I want to acknowledge that there are many ways that we can engage with the nonprofit sector. As Diana mentioned, some of us are board members, some of us are volunteers, most of us are probably donors, probably 100% of us are donors, I would guess. And then some of us are staff, consultants as well. And each of these roles that we play have importance to supporting and sustaining healthy and impactful nonprofit organizations. Today, I'm really going to be sharing my knowledge and experiences from in the sector from a staff perspective. And as Diana mentioned, I've been fortunate enough to work in some of the most comprehensive and successful fundraising programs on the West Coast. And I've also been extremely lucky to work with several exceptional leaders in the development profession. Like everything else in life, you learn by making mistakes. And I'm really grateful that I've had leaders in my career that have allowed me to make mistakes and to learn from them and to grow and improve in this work. As Diana mentioned, this event kicks off the first of 5 sessions on the topic of philanthropy. Today, I'm going to focus on sharing an overview of the nonprofit sector, trends in giving, and then we'll wrap up by describing characteristics of a high-performing development program. If you have any questions along the way, I'm sorry, I wish we could have open dialogue, but this webinar format doesn't allow for it. But if you have questions, please just pop them in the chat and I'll stop here and there and see if there are any ones I can address. For those of us who work, lead, and volunteer for nonprofits, understanding the sector as a whole is really important. Being aware of trends and emerging issues across the ecosystem will help us navigate the ever-changing landscape and ensure that the organizations we love and care about, like ARCS, can thrive no matter what comes our way. So for the next few minutes, I'll share an overview of the sector. But first, I want to get you started, get your gray matter working with a few questions. So the first question is, how many nonprofit organizations are in the United States? So please pop your answers into the chat. Anyone? And you, 110,000. Elizabeth, millions. Diana. Debbie says 120,000. Elizabeth, 500. Okay, so 200,000. One of you is close. And Diana, you get the blue ribbon on this one. Oops, I have to get out of here first. Come on. Whoops. There are 1.5 million nonprofit organizations. This was as of 2022. So there's lots of competition for philanthropic dollars, as you can see. In Oregon alone, we have about 40,000 registered with the Department of Justice. The sector employs over 12 million people. That's about 10% of US workers. And it's the 3rd largest workforce behind retail and manufacturing. Now, here's another question for you. How many people volunteer, how many adults volunteer in the nonprofit sector in our country? Ready, set, go. Wow, okay, 2 million, millions. Did somebody, Ann, is that two? I can't, my zeros are bleeding. Is that 20 million? Looks like it's 6 million, 20 million, 5. Okay. So you're a lot far off on that one. In fact, it's almost 78 million people volunteer for nonprofits in the United States. That's about 30% of us. It's pretty phenomenal. I was going to ask you to estimate the contribution to the US economy, but my trigger finger got happy and I moved the button too quickly. So as of 2022, the sector was contributing about 1 trillion to the US economy, which is about 5.6% of GDP. And that has grown over the past 20, 25 years. It used to be around 2% GDP. Now, the nonprofit sector has grown significantly in the past few decades. So the number of nonprofit organizations increased by 348% between 85 and 22. That's pretty significant growth. The majority of nonprofits have annual budgets of less than $1 million. And unfortunately, about 30% will not survive a 10-year run. And then finally, the annual revenue that's received in the sector is estimated to be around 2.6 trillion. So of that revenue, can anyone guess what the biggest source of revenue might be for nonprofits? I'm going to pull up the chat and see. What is the biggest source of revenue for nonprofits? Yep, government, government, government. Okay, that was an easy one. So 73% of the revenue that comes into nonprofit organizations is from government contracts and fees. So this is also a trend that's been going on for the last maybe 50 years, where the government has deployed or delegated its social programs, a lot of the running of those social programs and the dollars that come with that to the nonprofit sector. And you see this in Medicare, Medicaid, in healthcare, and many other subsectors in nonprofits. The second highest source of revenue is where we are playing and what we're talking about over the next few sessions, which is around contributions, gifts, and grants. And then finally, the 6% of revenue comes from dues and special event income, et cetera. Now, this next slide really points to some of our current challenges in the sector, and none of these should probably be shocking to any of us who've served on a board or who are staffing a nonprofit organization. But I want to call out culture change as one of the biggest and most acute ones that I've been facing in my role here, and our board has spent quite a deal of time and energy talking about. In nonprofit sector, many of us are trying to balance our need to steward the longtime donors and folks who have helped us get where we are today. So those people are mostly baby boomers and some Gen Xers. And at the same time, we're also trying to pivot our organizations and create environments that will be attractive to millennials and the generations that follow them. And that's no easy feat, as each of those generations have very different ways of existing in the world and needs and wants. So, you know, that's going to be a challenge that we're going to be addressing for many years to come. We're also facing a fairly significant leadership deficit in the nonprofit sector. It's been slowly happening over the last couple decades as baby boomers and some Gen Xers start retiring. There aren't enough skilled workers in the pipeline to fill the executive leadership positions. Also, in the nonprofit sector, chronic wage compression has exacerbated this problem, especially for millennials and the generations behind them. Unlike baby boomers and Gen Xers, we know that millennials are not going to work 60, 70-hour weeks for half of what they could make in the for-profit sector. So we really need to rethink how we structure our compensation programs and staffing. And there's a lot of research out there on ways that nonprofits are addressing these issues. So that's exciting to see. Burnout is also a huge issue. We all have seen that in the nonprofit sector, especially around healthcare. So while the pandemic really put a spotlight on that, it really took nonprofit healthcare providers that were already exhausted and overworked and pushed them right over the edge. Turnover was high. We all are experiencing difficulties getting appointments. They're like 6 months out for things. So we're seeing that in the nonprofit sector very acutely. Now, I want to stop there before we get into giving trends and see if anyone has any questions. I'm going to open the chat. Does anyone have any questions about sort of the general landscape of the sector? Or any problems that you're seeing in your nonprofit? Okay. We'll have some more time for Q&A down the road. So if you think of something, just pop it in the chat. So some of you may be aware that every year there's a report that comes out. It's called the Giving USA report. It has been published for 68 years. And today, the Indiana University's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy publishes it. It has a whole bunch of people, academics, people in the sector working to publish it. And it really gives us both a high level view of what's happening in charitable giving for a year at a time. And then it also drills down into some subsectors like what's happening in giving to education or science. So the report itself is about 300 plus pages long. And I have to admit that I have not read it word for word ever because it's just too much and it goes into a lot of detail. But if you want a copy of that, you can get it online or I'm happy to share it with you. So this next slide shows trends in total giving over time. And in 2022, giving reached $499 billion, which was a decline of $17 billion in current dollars. If you adjust that for inflation, it was a decline of $58 billion, which is quite significant. The average year-over-year change in total giving has been about $10 billion every year. In 2022, come on, keep up with me. In 2022, this slide shows giving by individuals. And in that year, we can see a decline in giving by individuals in a significant way. So in current dollars, the decline was 6.4%. And if you adjust for inflation, it's about 13.4%. Now, I've heard a few people who are experts talk about why this is, and it kind of makes sense to me as a fairly logical human being. So we are coming in 2022, we had a significant amount of donor fatigue from both the pandemic. People were fatigued from the pandemic in general, but there was also donor fatigue on top of that. And the Ukraine war had begun, so there was some fatigue around that too. And then interest rates were rising, and so things were starting to cost more. So all of these things kind of play a role in individual giving. But the thing to really look at as a key determinant of individual giving is disposable personal income. So this chart shows in America what disposable personal income has been over the past 40 some years. And you can see that we really never get much above 2.2%. And in the past few years, it has declined significantly. And in fact, it's 1.7 in 22, which is the lowest it's been since 2005. So that also drives the decline in individual giving. So the next slide just shows giving by foundations. And if you look at in total dollars, there was an increase in foundation giving, but if you adjust it for inflation, there was a decrease. And similarly, the next slide shows corporations and their giving, and that also had a 3.4% increase in current dollars, but if you adjust for inflation, it declined by 4.2%. Now, I want to show you a slide on corporate pre-tax profits, because this is what drives giving in the corporate environment. So they play a significant role in that, in what corporations give. And you can see here that it's quite low now at 9% in 22. And the 40-year average for corporate giving as a percentage of pre-tax profits has been about 1.1%. So we haven't really moved the needle on this dial very much over the past 40 years. So this next chart from the Giving USA report just shows contributions by source. So you can see here that what happens to individual giving is going to affect nonprofit sector, because individuals make the majority of the contributions to support our missions. And second to individuals is foundations, and then bequests, and then corporations are the lowest source of revenue. And then the next slide, we're looking at contributions in 22 by recipient organization. So you'll notice that religious organizations receive a high percentage of contributions. This has been true since I've been tracking with this report. It used to be somewhere around 33 when I first started looking at it in the 90s, and it has eroded quite a bit, but it's still the biggest piece of the pie. It makes sense to me because a lot of religious beliefs value giving and philanthropy. So it's kind of built into that culture. And then second to religion is human services, and then education, and then so on. So those numbers, I mean, if you think about 499 billion, I can't even quite wrap my head around that. So it really speaks to the generosity of individuals, companies, and foundations to our communities across the country. But if you look beneath the numbers, you might start seeing a different story. And I want to share a little bit with you another perspective on these numbers. So there's a think tank on the East Coast, and it's called the Institute for Policy Studies. And they research economic inequality in the US. And every year they publish something called the Gilded Giving Report. And it provides a unique perspective on trends in philanthropy. It also advocates for policy change that will push more money out from foundations and donor advised funds into the hands of working nonprofits. So the next few slides are from the Gilded Giving Report from 2022. So one of the things this report does is it identifies the top charities in the US by total giving. So I have another question for you to pop your answers into the chat. So what charity in America do you think received the most in total giving in 2020? Beth, that's good. Mm-hmm. We've got Red Cross. You can probably see all of these coming in on the screen. So something to do with animals. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? And UNICEF. Interesting. Okay. How's that? How's that for a shocker? So let's keep going. That's number one. What is number two? National Philanthropic Trust at 4.9 billion. Number three, Schwab Charitable, 4.7 billion. Number four, Beth, you said United Way and several others. So you are in the ballpark. The fifth is Goldman Sachs Philanthropy Fund. And number six is Vanguard Charitable Endowment Program. So don't be ashamed. I didn't get these right either. I thought it was going to be St. Jude Children's Hospital because they have all the commercials. They are in the top 20, but they're not in the top 10. So I would like to ask, what do you notice about this list of nonprofits? Yep, and they're donor advised fund holders. Jen, they aren't nonprofits. Susan, donor advised funds, yes. Yeah, well, you're right. Except Jen, they are nonprofits as far as the IRS is concerned, but they are not working nonprofits. They're not running programs in the communities. They are financial institutions, and absolutely. So this report is pointing out sort of a disturbing, in a way, trend over the past 20 years of donors moving away from direct giving to working nonprofits to putting their money in what we call intermediaries. And that includes donor advised fund holders, like most of the names on this list, and private foundations. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Some more findings from the Gilded Giving Report. The largest single recipient of charity for the past 6 years running is Fidelity Charitable. Gifts to private foundations and DAFs now divert nearly a third of charitable dollars away from working nonprofits. A third. Since 1990, assets held in private foundations increased by almost 700%, from 145 billion to 1.2 trillion today. The top two charitable causes of wealthy donors are their own private foundations and donor advised funds. And then the last one makes me very sad to see this trend, but right now, household giving has reached an all-time low. It's at 50%. So I'll show a quick chart on that. And you can see this decline over the past 18 years, where we used to be at about 70% US household giving, and now we're down to 50. So I hope we turn that around. And I know this organization is working on policy change that will help do that. Also, this next slide shows from the Gilded Giving Report, it shows where 7+ figure gifts went in 2021. And as you can see, the top recipients are foundations and donor advised funds. Now, a few more nuggets about foundations and donor advised funds, and these are not bad. I'm not suggesting that, but I think it's good for us to be aware of these trends and how these vehicles can work for us and maybe may not work for us in some ways. So as I mentioned earlier, private foundations have total assets of 1.2 trillion as of 2022. Same year, total assets held in donor advised funds, 229 billion. Now, the government forces or requires a minimum payout rate for private foundations of 5%. So they have to give away 5%. What they don't often share is that 5% can include operational costs. They can pay board members with these funds. They can pay for trips for family members to go and sort out where they're going to give the money that year. So all of those things can be expenses that are applied to that 5%. So it's not all going to working charities. And then unfortunately, there is no minimum payout rate for donor advised funds. Now, I know some of you on this call have donor advised funds and you work very hard to push the money out, and I love you for that. And there are lots of people who don't follow your practices, lots of them, because they're not required to. So I do want to show a chart with that looks at a trend for annual payout rates for private foundations. So you can see the red line is the 5% minimum payout rate. And on the left side, you'll see all foundations. So they're sticking pretty close to that 5%. Even in the midst of a pandemic, if you look at 20 and 21, you see a little bit of a drop in payout. The largest foundations with assets north of 1 billion stayed even closer to the 5% payout, and they even decreased in the middle of a pandemic. They went below 4.6. So, this, for those of us who are trying to raise money, it's good for us to be aware that, this is the norm. The question is, how do we inspire something that looks different than this and puts money back into our working nonprofits who are doing great things like funding scientists? This information from this report brings up some concerns for those of us who are leading and working in the nonprofit sector. The most obvious one is that billions of charitable dollars are warehoused in these in foundations and DAFs, and they're not being deployed to nonprofits. The second concern that is common is that voices of impacted communities and working nonprofits are often excluded in the decision-making process for how these funds do get deployed. And as I said, there's no legal requirement for donor advised funds to deploy dollars to working charities. And while donors get publicly subsidized tax deductions when they make a donation to one of these vehicles, money can sit for years or forever in a donor advised fund. I don't know about you, but that just doesn't seem right to me. And there's also a lack of transparency and oversight of DAFs from a nonprofit perspective. We can't look and see how many funds distributed, how much money from a DAF holder. All they do is show aggregate data. So we can't really see which ones are not moving, which ones haven't distributed in the past few years. So those are all concerns. And one of the bigger concerns for the long term, though, is as a smaller number of people are putting lots of money into these vehicles, it makes them, they're the ones making the decisions about the social issues that are being addressed with this funding. What organizations receive the funding, when the funds are distributed, how much money is distributed, how it's distributed, and if these funds can be renewed. So we have a really small number, and bless the Gates family, but they are sitting on billions of dollars, and they're making decisions about what social issues get addressed with those funds. And maybe Bill doesn't know some of our scholars and what they could be doing, right? So that to me brings up just some concern about our future and how much money and when it gets deployed and who makes those decisions. So I think all of us should be aware that this is going on in our sector. And if you have opportunities to talk to people about that, like your elected officials, then I encourage you to do that. I can also get a copy of the Gilded Giving Report to you, and the Institute for Policy Change that I mentioned earlier. They have a whole platform of policies that they're trying to push forward, which would get more money out of these vehicles and into the hands of working nonprofits. So that's that. So I'm going to move on into how we build a high performing development program. And I am sharing my observations going from higher ed, which they have a lot of resources. They hire lots of staff, and they have all 5 development disciplines going. And so looking at that and seeing what we can bring into our smaller nonprofit organizations is important. So when I talk about the characteristics, don't think you have to do all of these things. These are just to stimulate some thinking as you are making decisions on your board about where to put your money for fundraising. Where does that go? So before we get started on characteristics, I want to take a minute to remind us that there are 5 basic ways nonprofits raise money, and I call them disciplines: annual giving and digital giving, grants, special events, major gifts, and planned giving. This next slide I'm going to show gives a little more detail on each of those disciplines. And the ones that are highlighted down at the bottom are the ones that have a high return on investment for nonprofits, or have the highest return on investment. So across the top, you'll see the discipline, some activities associated with it, the return on investment, typical use of funding, and the funding cycle. So I know everyone really enjoys special events, but from a fundraising perspective, they're really the least effective way to raise money. They take a lot. Anybody who's ever served on one of those committees knows how much time it takes to produce and pull off a gala or a dinner or a golf tournament. It also really diverts staff time from higher value development activities. I'm speaking from a lot of experience in this one. So there's some lost opportunity cost that are associated with special events. The sales cycle of a special event is usually about a year. It takes a while to pull one of those off. Annual and digital giving, we've all been recipients of these kinds of activities: direct mail, social media, group fundraising and presentations, workplace giving, all of that stuff. So this is considered a loss leader for major gifts, because you have to build a rather large pool of prospective donors to have a successful major gift program. And a lot of times people come into your organization through annual and digital giving, either off social media or responding to some kind of solicitation or presentation. The use of funding here is can be varied, but usually it's unrestricted for operations, and the cycle can be days or weeks, which makes it appealing for those of us who've launched direct mail campaigns. The week after you put it in the mail, you can't wait to go to the mailbox and see all the checks that come in. It's very exciting. Now, the last 3 are high return on investment disciplines. Grants, this doesn't require staff, but it does require quite a bit of funder research to determine which funders align with your mission, which ones might you be able to put forward a competitive proposal to, and then some proposal writing, which requires some creativity as you need to align yourself and touch on the funding interest of the foundation. The most grants, once you get started and you have relationship with funders, you can really see some fairly high returns on your investment. In fact, my position has been funded for the first 3 years from a grant that our board and Ann Jarvis, you're on this call, thank you. You and a team of people put it together. And so that gave our chapter the capacity to engage with a staff person. So use of funding can vary, and usually it's 6 months to a year to turn a grant around. Now, major gifts is also very high return on investment. This is something many of us do naturally. It's relationship building with individuals who care deeply about your organization and what in its mission and what it's accomplishing in the community. This is also relationship building with advisors, for example, CPAs and trust officers and wealth managers and estate planning attorneys. Those folks can really help you get your word out through their client base. So any major gift program would be working to build a stable of relationships with trusted advisors as well. One thing to note on major gifts is that the work is customized and it's based on donor interests and values. So this is key, because once you connect your organization's mission and your output with somebody's passion, then they become a part of your family. And we've seen that in ARCS. I see it. I've seen it in all of my organizations that I work with, but most definitely in ARCS. And that's really fun when people ask me why I do fundraising and they're like, ooh, I couldn't stand that. I'm like, I don't know how you can't not want to do fundraising, because you get to talk to people and look under the hood and see them in their best light and when they're being their best self. And that is one of the beautiful things I love about doing major gift work. The cycle is long. It can take up to a couple years sometimes from the time you introduce yourself or the organization to somebody and the time that they make a commitment at that level. And then plan giving is really an extension of major gifts. It's a deepening of relationship. And it's more about educating a population on giving vehicles that may have some tax benefit for them. It may offset some capital gains tax, or if they have some fiscal event. Most fundraisers do not offer advice, as I do not offer advice. I will put people in touch with professionals who are really working in these areas and can look at somebody's situation and make a good suggestion about how to use a planned gift vehicle to best suit their needs and their current situation. The return on investment here is high, and funding can be used for multiple things, but this can take decades to materialize, as the name implies. It's planned giving. It's not outright giving. And we don't want our best buddies and people who care about us to go away anytime soon. So now I'm just going to share a few characteristics of a high performing development program. And I know, I mentioned this before, but this is really just me looking at and observing large organizations, large fundraising programs, and seeing what they're doing. I'm going to share that with you, and hopefully it'll stimulate some thinking about what 1 or 2 or 3 of these things are you doing well already, and maybe some of the other things that you might consider in the future. So the first characteristic is that staff and volunteers are knowledgeable and set up for success. They have the time and the tools to do fundraising well. I know some of my other executive director and development director colleagues talk about spending way too much time on operational things like, HR or all the things that we have to take a look at. And they don't have enough time to really do good relationship building. So when you think about your program, ask yourself, do we have enough time to actually do this work well? And do we have the tools to do it well? And I'll touch on a couple of those in a minute. High performing programs also have modern, well-resourced operations that are built on best practices in the sector. This is everything from how you enter a gift into your database to how you track your major gift portfolio, how you do moves management. All of those things come into play and help you build the capacity in your organization to do to perform well in various disciplines of fundraising. The other characteristic that I've seen over the course of my career is that evaluation is data driven and leaders know what's working and what's not. In higher ed, this is a little easier to do because you have subspecialists running your digital giving program, and they have tests and they have segments they can test, so they can get stats back on that pretty handily. And they know, oh, this message worked with our alumni and this one tanked, so let's not do that again. They have the capacity and the staffing and the tools to do that. So, we probably in smaller nonprofits will not have that level of detail that we can get to, but as much as we can, set our goals and make sure that our dashboards are connected to those goals, and we review it and understand if a program is working or it's not working, then what do we need to do to course correct? Another characteristic is accurate donor and giving information. Now, I think most nonprofits do a really good job of recording that, Diana Gordon has made a $500 gift every year for the past 20 years at our special event. That's fabulous. And that's a part of her story. The other part of her story that we need in the nonprofit sector is the context of Diana. How many grandchildren does she have? What was her career in? What does she care about? Has she had a fiscal event lately that, may cause her to think about philanthropy? Is she married? Is she widowed? All of those things are key to understand about your donors so that you can make very good decisions and conversations and approaches to them when you want to start engaging in a gift conversation. Some other characteristics that I notice, and again, this is a lot about having staff to be doing this stuff and to be managed to goals and such. They have proactive engagement that happens all year round, and it's focused on high value activity. And what high value activity means in fundraising is face-to-face visit, or in our world today, maybe it's a video visit, but it's an individual conversation that you can have with folks because you learn a lot about them. You learn a lot about what they're concerned with, the other nonprofits that they may be engaged with, what kinds of gifts they've made that really excited them. You can really dig beneath the surface and understand a person on a different level. And that understanding is going to put your organization in a much better place to have a major gift conversation with them, or not. Perhaps they do care about animals. And I don't, we don't really deal with saving animals in ARCS, but gosh, I know the development director down at Dove Lewis, and I can put that person in touch with them. I've actually gotten a 5-figure gift one time for doing just that. Somebody gave my organization $10,000 because they appreciated that I turned them on to a person who worked in the area where they had more passion. The next characteristic is just going back to that slide that I went over. The programs are built around those high return on investment disciplines because they are maximizing giving capacity. And then they're strategic and focused on constant growth. So instead of thinking about what we're going to do, next month in annual giving, strategic development is, where do we want to be in 3 to 5 years? How many prospects do we need to get there? What do we need to do if we don't have them? And how do we also look at our current donors and what can we do to help them increase the level of their giving to us? So those are the things that these high performing shops are thinking about. And then just a couple more things. Compelling case statements and giving opportunities. And the caveat here is that they are donor centric. So a case statement is only going to be compelling to a potential donor if they care about the thing that you do. So you have to listen and understand what it is that they want to change in the world. And then your case statement has to be positioned in that way. Now, we have one of my favorite people. I've known her for many years, and she is she donates to many organizations around town, but she mostly cares about climate change. And she has she funds a scholar award with us, and she does that because we give her scholars who are studying climate change, and she absolutely loves that. So that's how, instead of approaching her with a broad case statement about science and all of that, knowing that about her, my case statement would be about the scholars who are looking into addressing climate change in many different fields in STEM. So again, the most important part of this is that it's focused on what the donor cares about, not what we need as a nonprofit organization. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I can't really overstate this, that successful nonprofit fundraising programs have healthy donor and prospective donor base. And a range there is, for every one major gift you have, you need about 4 prospective donors to get to that, because you're going to have 3 no's and 1 yes, hopefully. And when you're small and you may not have been attentive to getting more people into your donor base and into your community, that's a big hill to climb. And there are strategies to do that. But that's definitely something that successful and high-performing fundraising teams do. They have that. And then finally, revenue gains that are made are consistent. You're seeing this happen year over year, and they can be replicated. So it's not a one-off. A lot of organizations don't even count their mega gifts when they're doing their analysis. They'll pull them out, but you still see the growth. You want to see growth in dollars and growth in overall revenue received every year. It's never enough. Okay, so that is, we have about 8 minutes, and I'm really sorry we can't open up and turn off our mute and chat with one another, but again, the system doesn't allow for that. So I wanted to just open it up to questions that you might have, and you can put them in the chat. And some of the questions that I want to know, is there a topic that you would like to know more about? And do any of these issues we talked about relate to what you're seeing in your own development programs? And what does that make you think about? Maybe you ask your board for additional budget in something, or you'll want to look at some data in your organization's fundraising program. I don't know. So I'm gonna pull up the chat here and see if you have any questions. Aletha, I saw you raise your hand, but I can't, if you want to pop your question into the chat, we'll get it addressed. Ann Jarvis says, how can we best deploy a broader group of member volunteers to boost your philanthropy? It's a great question, Ann, and I think like having everybody start from the same playbook is very important, which is kind of what we're doing here today, is giving everybody the tools they need to go out and be the army that, you know, large nonprofits have staff for. We don't have that. So we need to lean on our volunteers to go out, and that's been true for ARCS since its inception. Elizabeth Bell said, I love that you enjoy fundraising, but how would you advise those of us who are not so comfortable to go about supporting fundraising in our organizations? You know, that's a great question, Elizabeth. And the truth of it is you already do this. You network with people, you love talking and discovering things, you're curious about people, and that is a characteristic that I always look for in a major gift officer or a development director. They've got to be curious about people. So the more you interact with people and you find out what they care about, you know, if you don't want to be the person to cultivate the relationship over time, then for our organization, you can collaborate with me, and I will go out and put them on a path and do that and engage you as you would like to be, as much or as little as you would like to be. In organizations that don't have a staff person to do that, you have, hopefully you have a philanthropy committee with volunteers who know how to cultivate a major donor. And we are going to talk about major gifts in the next 2 sessions. So if you want more information there, then we'd be happy to share that, or the recording of it. But Elizabeth, you're already doing the work. You don't have to ask for the money. Just get me in the loop, and I'll follow up. Debbie, I hope I answered the question well enough for you, Debbie, when I answered Ann's. And then Nancy says, what is the rule of thumb for 5% of contribution revenue that should be budgeted in fundraising expenses? I guess I'm not quite, are you talking, Nancy, about what?
So she typed in an additional message there saying, sorry for the typo, delete the random 5%. So what is the rule of thumb for percent?
Well, I think there has been talk about what a typical nonprofit should have in terms of its overhead, Nancy. But the reality is if you've seen one nonprofit, you've seen one nonprofit. All nonprofits are at a different stage of development. And sometimes if you're a startup, you might need to spend 50% of your budget on fundraising or public relations or whatever to get your name out there. So that doesn't make you bad or poorly managed. It just means that you are in a different place and that your organization needs to be doing things differently and putting money into things that are going to get it known. You know, there's a great TED Talk by Dan Pallotta that I love to share with people who ask me these kinds of questions about expenses and fundraising. So I can share that out with you in a follow-up if you'd like. It's about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Diana, you've watched it. So he has a really good perspective on this very question, and it hopefully it gives all of us some some talking points and a different way to think about investment in infrastructure for nonprofits.
So it looks like we are just about at the end of our time together. If anybody has a final question, we can probably just about squeeze that in. But otherwise, we want to thank you very much for spending this hour with us. And we hope to see you again on February 1st, where Lori will be speaking about major gifts. And the topic will be building a major gift portfolio. Here's a new message in here. Let's see, Lori. Thank you. Thank you, Beth. So, Lori, do you want to close it up?
Yes, so I hope to see you on the 1st, I believe. And
Yep.
I am working to bring other people into these conversations. So hopefully it won't just be me yammering on for a whole hour. We'll have a couple of other faces and experiences to share and add to our knowledge base here in the coming few sessions.
And please, everyone, share the information. Thank you. Looks like Alex has shared the information about how to register. If you just copy that and share that out with your friends, we'd love to see more folks in the room next time. So thank you all. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.